Good afternoon, everyone. And I know that several of you are still just joining us. So we wanted to welcome you to the monthly Conexxus webinar series. Today, we have a special presenter, Elizabeth Terry, who is the Community Engagement Manager. She's with the PCI Security Standards Council. And today she'll be talking about how to protect your business and PCI resources for securing that payment card data. Our agenda today, I'll go through a few housekeeping items and talk a little bit more about Elizabeth and her background. Talk a little bit about Conexxus and how they help the industry. We'll go through the presentation and then we'll have questions and answers at the end. Just wanted to remind everybody that the webinar is being recorded. It will be made available in approximately 30 days. You can find the webinar and replay it under YouTube if you subscribe to the Conexxus Online subscription, or under the Conexxus.org website under Resources. There's a very short survey. It's only like 3 or 4 questions provided at the end. It also gives you a chance to provide us with feedback as far as what you'd like to see for future webinars. And if you complete that survey, you'll receive, about a couple hours later, you'll receive a link to obtain the presentation. Everybody is in listen-only mode and is on silent, and so therefore we do ask that if you have any questions, please type them into the questions portion of the GoToWebinar panel. And so all you have to do is click on that questions tab and then type in your question. We do ask that you refrain from asking vendor-specific questions. And of course, if you ever have any questions or need further information, please email Conexxus at info@conexxus.org. Our host today is Miss Allie Russell, and so thank you, Allie, for all the coordination and logistics that you've done. I am your moderator. I'm QIR Gunderson. I am the chairman of the Conexxus Data Security Standards Committee. My day job, I'm the point of sale manager at Citgo Petroleum. And as I mentioned earlier, we're very, very lucky to have Elizabeth Terry with us from the Security Standards Council. She has over 20 years of experience in the payment card industry, including managing enterprise projects encompassing PCI compliance, security, system design, implementation, and most recently, the standards development initiatives at the PCI Security Standards Council. She also holds the Certified Information Systems Security Professional and Certified Blockchain Solutions Architect certifications. Just a little bit about Conexxus before we move into the presentation here, and that Conexxus is an independent, nonprofit, member-driven organization. So for instance, I am a volunteer, Elizabeth is a volunteer, and Conexxus, a lot of people know us by setting standards for data exchange, for security, mobile commerce, and they also provide vision and help identify some of the emerging technology and the trends that are happening, and really are an advocate for the petroleum industry. And so we have a webinar schedule here, and that is, we've had some, like I said, we've had some great webinars. In January, we had Managed Detection and Response. Obviously today, Elizabeth Terry is taking us through PCI DSS for petro merchants. In March, we have Protecting Your Stores and Main Office from Data Security and Ransomware Attacks by the folks at Acumera. Security Innovation is going to talk about how not to get phished and train your employees to avoid that ransomware. In May, Simon at Mako will be providing information on firewall compliance, just truly the basics, the benefits, and the security. And in June, we'll have a W3C update. Moving on to July, we'll have a skimming webinar. I think that's all near and dear to many of our hearts, especially since we're encompassing more and more skimmers. In August, again, is to be determined, and so the survey at the end gives you an opportunity to provide us with some feedback as to what you'd like to see for future webinars. In September, the Omega team will be providing us an update to their data science presentation that they gave us about a year ago. In October, we don't have a webinar because Conexxus actually hosts and sponsors the Tech Edge series at the NACS show. In November, we'll have updates on outdoor EMV, and then again in December, we'll be adding another webinar based on your survey feedbacks. Conexxus has their annual sponsor coming up in Nashville at the end of April to beginning of May, and so we'd sincerely like to thank our 2018 Diamond sponsors. So we hope to see you all there. And so now I'm going to hand this over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, thanks again for sharing your knowledge and your time and all of your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Cara, for that. I'm super excited to be here and chat with you all today. Like she had said, we're going to be talking about some resources that PCI has developed to help you protect your business and secure your payment card data. So at the PCI Security Standards Council, we help secure that payment data. And simply put, our goal is to make payments safer, both here in the US and then around the world. And then we can do this because we find that we are uniquely positioned in the center of the payment ecosystem. And so with the world's most effective security standards that help you protect against criminal threats, by helping prevent, detect, and also to mitigate those cyber attacks. So one of the things primarily that helps in this aspect is that not only do we develop the security standards, but we also develop the programs that go along with them. So we have the training and the certification programs that go along with that, as well as educational resources. So right now we provide 14 security standards to the industry, along with best practices. We have training and education, the certification I mentioned. But unlike other organizations that offer standards, we take you to that next step with providing that practical guidance to help you ensure payment systems, they're effectively hardened against those cyber criminals. So I want to chat with you about our small merchant resources. So first, some background here. So organized crime is a business. And we have this quote here from Europol that talks mainly about some ransomware malware attacks and the fact that the threat from cybercrime is just being taken to a whole other level. And we know that banks and other major businesses are being targeted, but the thing to keep in mind is that small merchants are being targeted even more. So one of the things too to also know is that organized crime is also responsible for those fuel dispenser skimmers. So definitely want to keep track of that. All right, so let's take a look for a minute about what is causing those data breaches. So some of you may already know this, but we want to focus on the causes of data breaches for merchants, and there's three main things: weak and default passwords, unpatched software, and insecure remote access. And for years now, what we've been finding is that these three things keep coming up over and over again. So the first is weak and default passwords. So we have reports, as you can see here from the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, that show around 80% of all the hacking-related breaches happen and are successful through stolen, default, or weak passwords. So default passwords are like the ones your technician would use to install the point-of-sale system when it's brand new. And we want to remind you to not forget to change the passwords both on your indoor-outdoor PIN pads, as well as your electronic payment server and fuel controllers, because these passwords are often not changed, and the criminals can easily find lists of those default passwords on the internet and be able to use them. What they typically do is they'll do a lot of surveillance. They'll find out what devices you're using, what software you're using, what systems you're using, and then just go do the research and pull those default passwords and then start banging away at the systems. One of the things too is that default or easily guessable passwords give them easy access into the system. So the second leading cause of breaches, as we talked about, is unpatched software. So vendors release those security updates or patches to correct those weaknesses or vulnerabilities in the software in the system. Criminals know about these weaknesses and they look for them. They'll scan the systems and they look for them to be able to exploit them. The other thing too to remember is that they're on those notification lists as well. So this is how they have that information, doing your own research. And many of the attacks can be avoided if merchants would install the updated POS software, which contains the security patches, as quickly as possible. A lot of merchants don't know how important those patches are, or even how to install that updated software. So when your processor or your oil brand asks you to upgrade your POS software, it's really very important to complete that upgrade as soon as possible and mitigate that risk. So many attacks happen from remote access software that's used by your vendors or used by your technicians. But the other thing to keep in mind here is don't forget about your own personal remote access that you might have into your store. And that might include access to your back office computer, your tank monitoring system, video surveillance. It could also include access that you might have to other devices like a cooler, coffee, or fountain machines. Anything that uses the same internet connection as your credit card processing transmission is vulnerable and needs to be secured. So, like I said, it's a great tool for the POS vendor to be able to remotely support those POS systems, but if it isn't properly secured and monitored, say by your firewall provider, then it leaves the merchants at risk. And insecure remote access is the #1 entry point for attacks against brick and mortar merchants. So that leads me into our small merchant resources and then what the PCI Security Standards Council has been doing to help make merchants more secure. So before I specifically get into the merchants, I want to give you guys some background into what we were thinking and why we think this information is so important. Small merchants typically think they're safe because they're small. They, I don't have any information necessarily that a criminal might want. Hackers aren't interested in my information, or they can't find us, that type of thing. But they're completely wrong about that because they're being targeted just like larger organizations, more so even. And because they have payment card data in their point of sale systems, that makes them a bigger target. Because according to the report from TrustWave, that payment card data is the #1 type of data that attackers are going to look for in a data breach. So if they breach your systems, that's what they're going after. And then there's a Ponemon Institute Institute report from 2017 that says that the chances of being hit by a data breach are as high as 1 in 4 now. And one of the things that I like to note here is most of the big data breaches over the last several years, you heard a lot about it, but because breaches are becoming so much more frequent, you're not hearing about them anymore unless you're actually going out and doing that type of research or you're getting those types of notifications. But just know they're still happening and they're happening frequently. Many small merchant or small petroleum merchants specifically think that their processor, point of sale vendor, maybe the oil brand is responsible for PCI compliance and securing of that data, but that's not true. As the merchant, you're ultimately responsible for securing your POS systems, your payments, your loyalty data, and then all of the devices that use that same internet connection as your payment card transmission. So if you're unsure who's responsible for what, just reach out to your processor, your oil brand, and just make sure that you are abundantly clear who's the responsible party for the security and the PCI compliance. One of the things I want to note, we're going to talk about it in a moment, is a resource called Questions to Ask Your Vendor that may help you in that conversation. So I seen a stat that said almost 60% of attacks, and this is breaches and other things, are happening in small businesses. So that's something to really keep in mind. While there are multiple ones going on, that 60% of all the attacks are happening there. And this particular one here from Verizon says that 90% of all the accommodation breaches are point of sale breaches. That's point of sale machine breaches. So for small merchants, the impact of a breach can be absolutely devastating, and some merchants don't come back from that. So small petroleum merchants usually don't have the luxury of trained security staff. They rely on their point of sell technicians to make sure the system's installed correctly, and they rely almost exclusively on payment cards and then internet-connected payment systems to exist. So that puts them at a huge and great risk of compromise. So now let's talk about the actual small merchant resources. So first I want to note that at the top of the screen, you'll see there our URL for our small merchant microsite, PCISSC.org/merchants. You'll see that throughout this presentation, and that's where you're going to find these documents. You can also find them in our document library, but specifically there. So the main document I want to talk about is the Guide to Safe Payments. So this particular document helps merchants understand their risks, provides simple practices that can be used to protect themselves. We removed the jargon. We know in the payments industry, we love our acronyms, we love our jargon. So we've removed that. We also put it in kind of a non-scary format, so it's really easily digestible information. It also includes areas that are major causes for those small merchant breaches, your default passwords, your patching, your remote access. But there's also other key areas as well that merchants need to understand. So one of the other key documents is the common payment systems. So this includes diagrams of the most common payment systems, and while it doesn't currently include specifically petroleum at this time, if you reach out to your processor, your oil brand, maybe your firewall provider, PCI program provider, they can assist you about specific petroleum information, and even your POS vendor can help you a little bit on this. And one of the other things I wanted to state about this is that the Small Merchant Task Force is looking at and considering the addition of new diagrams, petroleum being one of those. So we'll keep you posted on that. Okay, so here's a page that comes from our Guide to Safe Payments that I really like. So we all know that complexity and cost are typically really big barriers for small merchants, if they even can consider security at all, because they may not know. So they can't spend a lot of money on security, they don't understand, or they don't see the cost benefit of that. But this chart shows some of the key areas that the Guide to Safe Payments focuses on. So one thing to note is categorized by cost, which is indicated by a coin, the ease of implementation, which is indicated by a wrench, and then the risk mitigation value, which is indicated by a hand. So for example, if you look up in the top left of the screen, you'll see using strong passwords, changing default ones. And one of the things to note here is that cost is low, so it's cheap, it's easy to implement, and it gives you a really big bang for your buck with the risk mitigation value. So this is, I like this pictorial, and it can be used for multiple different things, but it gives you a really easy way to look and see, okay, where am I going to get my biggest bang for my buck kind of thing. And then probably the easiest, quickest data protection that you could get is to install a firewall and make sure that every device, like your tank monitoring system, your video surveillance, that back office computer, they're all plugged into that firewall. So many oil brands and processors require firewalls or security devices. So if you haven't already installed one, if you have already installed one, pardon me, you're one step closer in going in the right direction. And the other thing to note is the firewall isn't the only important thing that you can do to protect your business. Like I said, looking at this pictorial, you can take a look at the multiple different things that you could do, be able to figure out what else might be beneficial for you. Okay, I mentioned this earlier, the questions to ask your vendors. So this explains the various service providers, the different type of vendors that a merchant might encounter or is likely to use whenever they're installing a payment system or a point of sale system. And it helps the merchant to know what types of questions that they should ask them and then what the expected response should be. So not only is it helping to educate the merchant, but it's also giving them additional information and being able to communicate effectively with their vendor or their service provider. And at the end of it, there's links to other resources as well, such as the payment brands list of PCI DSS compliant service providers, which sometimes is a requirement. from the payment card brands. So the other document that you see here is the glossary of payment and information security terms. So this uses, again, simple language to provide really clear, understandable definitions. It was derived from our PCI DSS glossary, but we simplified some of the definitions where needed, because if you've taken a look at our standards, it gets really complex, and there's a lot of technological terms that we're using that may not necessarily be understood by you know, a single owner operator. So we also added specific definitions for small merchants in this glossary as well. So for example, PCI DSS compliant and then PCI DSS validated. So what is a small merchant? It's a question that the task force was asked often, and it was one that we discussed often. But what we want to do is let you know what our definition of a small merchant is as we went into building these documents. So one thing to point out first, the task force can't say whether a merchant is a small merchant. That's a compliance question that has to be answered by the payment brands program with their definition of merchant levels. And then the other thing to note is that the documents were designed for merchants with the following characteristics. So typically an independently owned and operated business, single location or few locations, limited or no IT budget, and no IT personnel often is the case. So examples might include a mom and pop store or single owner locations. Another thing that's really important to note is that whether a small merchant is required to validate PCI compliance is typically determined by the payment brand, the oil brand, or the merchant's acquirer. So all of the materials I just talked about were originally released in 2016. And again, that was to provide that education and awareness, help merchants understand what the risks are, and give them really simple things to be able to address those risks, especially the critical ones. And then phase 2, which was released last year in 2018 in August, included updates to all 4 of those resources that we just talked about, to include more e-commerce guidance, as well as a few additional payment diagrams. And then last year, we also added something that I'm kind of excited about. It's the Data Security Essentials Evaluation Tool. I know that's a mouthful, but basically this is just a simplified set of validation criteria for small merchants, and it encourages some reasonable mitigation of those security risks that small merchants would typically encounter. And one of the things we're hoping is that it will minimize what we call that checkbox compliance approach that a lot of small merchants take with the current self-assessment questionnaires. And that's the survey and question list that merchants must complete for their PCI compliance. So we want to be able to give them additional information and education and help them understand why security is important, instead of just checking a box and signing a form and sending it in. Okay, so a bit more on the DSE tool for short. So this is merchant information only. It's not something that they can submit to PCI. This is not something that we take in. Basically answering a few quick questions and then acknowledging that they will need to talk to either their acquirer or oil brand for completion and submission instructions. So they review a high-level diagram for how they accept payments, and then they select one. And then from there, they'll select more detailed diagram on how their payment method actually works. And then they can download that related evaluation form. So for petroleum merchants, one thing to note is that point-of-sale systems that also accept payments at the fuel dispensers do require self-assessment questionnaire D. Okay, so this shows one of the evaluation forms. So form 4, the payment terminals and electronic cash registers that share non-card data, which some of you may have. So this includes best practices from that guide to safe payments that we just talked about, and then where it's relevant for that specific payment type. So there may be, if you look at the different payment types, there may be different questions that are applicable. And then the merchant simply answers all of those best practices in an actual PDF form. So one of the things I want to note, you can see here, is that some of the answers, or the answers include things such as, I do this consistently, this isn't applicable to my business environment, I don't understand, I don't know. So that's something that helps to provide more details to the oil brand or the acquirer who work with those merchants. So you can help them if they don't understand, you can help educate them a little more. There's also a summary that shows up at the end of the form that shows how many times they use that answer, which is also a really good indicator of, you know, whenever that POS technician's going out or whenever you're interfacing with that merchant, they may need a little bit of additional education around that particular area. So I'm pretty excited about the possibilities of this. Some of the payment card brands have started to promote this, and that information is out there. If you haven't received anything from the brands on that, feel free to reach out to them and get that latest information. Okay. So helping us help them being the small merchants. There's a few key takeaways that we hope you remember about these particular resources. First, you can really help us by getting these resources into those small merchant customers' hands, because PCI SSC doesn't have direct touch points with small merchants, but you guys do. So tell them about the resources, get their feedback, and on, you know, how we can make these things better. You guys can even give us feedback on how we can make these better. Just let us know. We're looking for that input. Secondly, educate the merchant. Let them know all the simple things that they can do today. Using the table that I showed you with all the pictorials, the biggest bang for your buck. That's a really great summary of those security basics with the cost, the ease of implementation, risk mitigation value, just showing them and educating them, or even educating yourself that way. Thirdly, help merchants understand the risk with remote access and default passwords. I think these are two of the biggest things, and just make these items secure when that software is being installed or their systems are being installed for merchants. That's the key thing. And then educating the merchants on how they can protect themselves as well. And then lastly, if you do have remote access into a merchant environment, we want to make sure that you're using secure remote access, and then also to help that small merchant manage that if you're supporting those systems for them. Basically, so it's not left active all the time, for example, because if it's left active and someone figures out how to get into it, then that system has been breached. Even if it's into, say, your back office system or, you know, the tank monitoring system, once they get into that network, if everything is on the same network, then they can pivot into that payment system. Okay. So some of the other questions that we get about these resources is, can I co-brand these documents and be able to have them on hand to hand out to customers or to employees if security awareness, if that's part of your security awareness training? And absolutely you can. We have a paper-bound or paper comb-bound version of the Guide to Safe Payments that you can co-brand. The other documents are all PDFs, and the DSC tool is an HTML-based tool. And we do highly encourage you to co-brand these documents. You know, one of the things is that Guide to Safe Payments, it's small. It's a great handout when you go and visit merchants, or, you know, just for handing out to employees. And this is something that if you come to our community meetings, we'll have a huge supply of those in the first couple of days, and they go like hotcakes because all of this information is free. It is absolutely free. So one of the other things too is that you can print out, laminate, however you want to do it, the picture of the common payment systems that resembles what point of sale systems you support or what point of sale systems, that particular merchant may have, and then explain how they can protect themselves. So again, the main page for these documents is pcissc.org/merchants. If you go to that page, then about halfway down the page on the website, you'll see the co-branding tab, and then that's where you'll be able to get additional information on doing so. Okay. So at the council, if you've heard any of us speak at community meetings or at other conferences, we always emphasize people, process, and technology as the keys to securing payment data. So with the people, you want to make sure you're hiring qualified, trusted partners. You want to train your staff. Make sure that they understand like payment data security essentials. The other piece of that is process. So making sure you've got the right process and policies and procedures in place to make sure that security is a priority day to day, in that day-to-day business as usual kind of activity. And then lastly, technology is ensuring that you're using the right technology, one, and then it's implemented correctly. It's implemented in a secure fashion as well. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about how this relates to some of our programs. So this is the people aspect. So we have the Qualified Integrator and Reseller program, and this was launched in 2012 to be able to provide additional assurances to merchants and also to be able to support our integrators and resellers. Initially, the program was at a company level with the individual QIRs underneath them. We no longer list companies, but when we did, we had over 449 companies that were listed on the system. I'll talk a little more about that change in a moment. Right now, we have over 1,600 QIRs listed today. But the key is we need more. So what types of organizations employ QIRs? Well, your certified POS technicians, all different kinds of merchants, service providers, processors. Like really, we're talking about any industry that's impacted by the secure implementation and maintenance of those payment applications and or affected by PCI standards. So for petroleum, it's typically the certified POS technician, such as the VASC or an ASC. So again, who becomes a QIR? One thing you want to know is that job descriptions aren't really a good indicator of what a role might involve. But the key is if that secure installation and maintenance of those payment applications and terminals is essential or critical, then the QIR certification could be the answer for that, or having a QIR program within your organization could be the answer. And then depending on acquirer or payment bearing rules, a QIR is required. So all types of people, like I said, we said your technicians, your integrators, your installers, implementation specialists, etc., might choose to be a QIR, but regardless of where they're employed, there's a benefit of both credibility and then PCI knowledge that would play a role in day-to-day activities. So what do QIRs actually do? One, they act as the experts in the proper installation of payment applications in a secure manner, which is most important. They also educate their merchant clients on why security is important to their business. So this was one of the things I mentioned earlier, is that a lot of times a small merchant doesn't understand why security is important to their business. They often provide support to investigations that are being conducted by our PCI forensic investigators. So when a breach happens, the PFIs come in and do that investigation. They might often provide ongoing support and maintenance to the payment applications and terminals. So your point of sale technicians install it, and yet they're still monitoring and supporting that remotely for you. So I mentioned earlier that we made some changes to the program. Initially, like I said, we listed companies, but based on feedback on the length of the training, the pricing of the training, some high turnover in the integrator and reseller market, we made changes last year in early 2018. And these were made to reduce the friction of what was happening, increase participation in the program, and again, focus on those 3 key security controls that we've talked about: patching, passwords, and remote access. We also changed the certification to be completely transferable. So for an individual who has that QIR certification, they are able to take that with them so long as their requalification is current. If they moved on to a different company, they could take that certification with them. The other thing too is that we reduced the training time and the cost. So initially the training was a 3-day instructor-led training, and the cost was higher. I don't recall the actual cost at the moment, but what we did is we reduced that training to be computer-based training 1 day, and to take that training and exam is $100 per individual for that initial qualification, and then $100 every year for that requalification, that annual requalification. So because we focused on those 3 key security controls, one of the things we did too was develop infographics on each of those 3. And this is available both directly from our website and from the merchant website. Free information. It's really great information to have just to learn, and it's also really good information that you can pass out to your customers. The other thing that we did along with this is we developed the Payment Data Security Essentials video series. So if you are more of an auditory learner, these videos are on patching, passwords, and remote access. They're short videos and they're super simple. You can find them on the website as well, and they talk to all of these things. So what's the value of getting that QIR certification or perhaps implementing a QIR program within your organization? So one of the things is that it's recognition of that criticality of all the security controls that are applied during an installation. Merchants' trust in the quality, reliability, and consistency of the work and the installations is huge. And then as a QIR, you're part of a larger community of security professionals. Like I said, there's over 1,600 of those around the world right now. And then another great way to differentiate your organization is implementing a QIR program. And not only does this bring that merchant trust, it also allows you to demonstrate your commitment to payment security and education of your merchants. And some companies with QIR programs make becoming a QIR requirement of employment for their technicians. And then the training and exam are all online, and that can be done at a time that's convenient for you or your technician. So I mentioned earlier that the certification follows the individual. So like I said, even if they leave their current organization, as long as they've met that annual requalification criteria, which is, paying the requalification fee and then taking the training and exam, then that certification is going to follow that individual. And a lot of people will use this as an indication of payment security and installation knowledge with a new organization. And then sharing of knowledge and best practices is a really interesting thing. We've implemented a quarterly webinar. We just had our quarterly webinar on Tuesday for the first quarter. So this is a really great way to come in and learn more about, updates from PCI, but also do deep dives into some of that other information, such as implementation statements, or we just talked about, cryptography and what you should know as a QIR. And it provides a really solid foundation for a career in that secure installation of payment acceptance software. One of the other benefits is that you get a logo that you can use in your communication, but you're also listed on our website that's searchable by merchants worldwide. So anybody that's looking for someone to be able to come in and install their point of sale systems or software, you're going to be on that list, and they can choose from that list and get in touch with you to initiate that. Okay. Another set of people that I want to talk about is our PCI professionals. So right now we have more than 3,000 PCI professionals. But something to note is that like 1,100 of them are outside of the US. This is the biggest single group of certified folks through PCI. Okay, so again, who employs PCIPs? So again, we're talking about any industry that's affected by the PCI standards. because this goes hand in hand with organizations that perhaps employ internal security assessors. And one thing is that it's worth noting that a large number of participating organizations within the council will employ a PCIP. So lots of folks, anyone and everyone within a business might become a PCIP if it is somehow involved in payments and PCI. So job descriptions don't give you a good indication of what's happening there, but if PCI DSS experience is essential, or PCI knowledge and knowledge of the requirements is essential, then that PCIP certification might be the answer. And it may not necessarily be someone that's directly involved in IT or the payments. It may be somebody on the business side. So again, like I said, all types of people. You've got compliance managers, you know, IT managers, your QA directors, merchant program managers, finance administrators, from, you know, being at a merchant, a financial institution, a payment brand, service providers, vendors, etc. And the one thing that they have in common is that their jobs intersected with something PCI related. So PCIP roles can be completely varied. So some of them might end up working on PCI full time, while others, that may be just like a really small part of their role. And PCIP is often a stepping stone and an entry into learning more about PCI. And PCIPs may be that missing puzzle piece to speak intelligently and confidently with internal and external stakeholders on matters related to PCI. So one of the things we get asked is, how do you become a PCIP? Well, there's a couple of requirements. 1, 2 years work experience in IT or an IT related role. You have to take the PCIP training and pass the exam, and that could be either instructor-led training or computer-based training. So, you know, computer-based training, again, that's something that's whatever's convenient for you to be able to do that. And then in order to maintain that qualification, you have to do, get 10 CPEs per year, pay that maintenance, and then pass that requalification exam every 3 years. So you're getting the 10 CPEs a year for 3 years and then passing that exam. And today's webinar also counts as a CPE that you could use for that. And I wanted to note that our moderator today, Kara, is a PCIP. Okay, so what do PCIPs do within an organization? Anything and everything. They act as PCI DSS subject matter experts for areas of the business. They might, as you see here, write and review those policies. They may own those PCI DSS controls within an environment. They may work with the ISA or the QSA, depending on who's doing that PCI DSS assessment. They might end up managing a call center or being in charge of firewall reviews, managing user accounts, managing the merchant service provider program. They may provide training of staff. There's lots of things that a PCIP could actually wind up doing within an organization, which makes them such valuable assets to have. So being a PCIP, the value you bring is really important to a lot of roles. So knowledge of the standards, how they work together, how they work to protect cardholder data is needed in many organizations. And so that grounding in the knowledge that's been provided by PCI SSC is a great way to begin your career in the payments industry. One of the big things is being able to interpret those PCI DSS requirements or any of the standard requirements correctly, which is a large part of the training for a PCIP. It sets you up to be able to advise and even vet external advice about implementing secure processes and systems. And the other thing too is like having the confidence to answer and push back when the meaning of the requirement isn't being met makes you a really valuable asset to the company. You know, excuse me, when internal stakeholders need advice, perhaps a merchant dealing with the acquirer or an oil brand needs advice, or to, you know, a financial institution working with PCI or any of the other standards, there's always a need for expertise, and a PCIP can fill that need for expertise. We've been told a lot of times from QSAs and ISAs that they're relieved when any part of the business even has heard of PCI. PCIPs help bridge that gap in the business knowledge. So I was going to say that my own personal experience with PCI would have been greatly improved with this training and knowledge for sure. Because PCIPs and PCI projects span like many business areas, they wind up exposing that person who has that certification to processes and experiences that they might not otherwise had any contact with. And then that knowledge gained through that certification just enhances that experience by providing the knowledge to understand it on a much, much deeper level. So for me, the experience of working with PCI DSS has taken me to places that I would not have otherwise been, and has landed me here today talking with you guys. So, okay, a little bit more about the value for PCIP. It follows the individual. So just like the QIR, it follows the individual. And internal security assessors often get this particular certification because if they leave their company, they get to keep that PCIP certification, and they could use that as an indication of PCI knowledge with that new organization. And again, for PCIPs, we also have quarterly webinars. We do networking events at our community meetings. And there's also a private LinkedIn group for all PCIPs to be able to share and exchange knowledge. And again, it's just a really solid foundation for a career in payments. And then lastly, you're also listed on our website. So anybody could go out and check and validate that you have that certification, along with that logo that you could use in communications if you chose to. Okay. So I want to talk briefly about our case studies. So we have a lot of case studies that are available, not only from a PCIP perspective, but from an acquirer or an assessor perspective. We've just completed our first QIR case study, and we'll be publishing that in the near future, so take a look at that. But it's an opportunity. A case study is an opportunity to showcase how a PCI certification has brought value to an individual, to their organization, and then to the industry as a whole. So you can find the case studies on our website. They're free to download. They're usually just 2 pages answering some questions, but giving you an idea of how this might benefit you. If you're interested, perhaps, in doing a case study with us, we would love to hear from you. Just email us. You can email at PCIP or QIR at PCISecuritystandards.org. Or email me directly and let me know. Okay, I just want to talk about a few other PCI resources that we have. I've mentioned the document library numerous times. So in the document library, you will find every document that we have ever published, from our standards to our program guides, all of our best practices and guidance, all of our infographics are all located in our document library. Again, this is free for you to download. So there's lots of stuff out there that you could go educate yourself with, learn more about it. And if you're feeling, you know, kind of, I guess, eager and want to download the standard for PCI DSS or some other standard and take a look at that and read those requirements, have at it. It's all there for you. So speaking of some of the guidance and best practices, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that we have a really good document on building a security awareness program. This was developed by, we have special interest groups every year that get elected, and then it is made up of subject matter experts from the industry who come together to develop guidance on a specific topic. So the security awareness program is a great one. We also have one on working with third parties and doing the due diligence with a third-party service provider. Maintaining PCI DSS compliance was just recently updated. We also just updated our PCI DSS compliance in the cloud. And then we have skimming prevention, protecting against phishing attacks, etc. Those infographics are available as well. And then just to note, you know, we're continuously developing those documents and resources. So if there's a topic that you guys need to hear more about, please feel free to reach out to us and we will consider that. Lastly, I wanted to mention here the PCI Resource Center. So if you have a certification with the council, We have a resource center that's available and exclusive to you based on your certification. You have access to all of the previous newsletters, all of the training that you've taken or need to take, any additional documents that apply to your certification, and then all of those quarterly webinars that I mentioned, they are recorded and they are placed here. So if you aren't able to attend live, you can always go back and listen to them and learn. So any material or any training material that's out there that you've taken and passed in the previous year is there, and then any training you need to take will be the most recent training. Okay. So I'm going to end with doing a shameless plug for our events for 2019. We are excited about our India Forum, which is the first ever India Forum next month in India. We just closed the doors yesterday because we exceeded capacity, so this is going to be absolutely amazing. So hopefully somebody you know gets to attend that. Then we're down in Sao Paulo for our Latin America Forum in August, and then back up here in the US, well actually in Canada, in North America I should say, in September for our North America community meeting. And then in October, we're over in Europe, in Dublin for our Europe community meeting. And then we end the year in Melbourne for our Asia Pacific community meeting in November. So we hope to see some of you there. If so, look us up. I'd be happy to have a conversation. And then with that, I will end. One of the things I just want to say is that together we help secure payment data, collaborating, educating our customers, providing simplified solutions, sharing of information, and then providing that guidance. And we look forward to working with you guys and collaborating more. So Cara, let's turn it back over to you.
Elizabeth, thank you. That was a ton of information and great information as well. And so, and I know that PCI isn't always directly related to petroleum, so we appreciate you were able to give us great direction on a lot of that in petroleum. So thanks. We did have a couple questions, and I just want to make remind everybody that you'll receive a link via email to complete a short survey. And if you complete the short survey, you will then receive yet another link to obtain a copy of the slides for this presentation. Also, the webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in approximately 30 days. You can you can search for Conexxus in YouTube is where it will be posted, and you can also go to the conexxus.org website and under resources find the webinars listed as well. Again, they're all posted on YouTube. So a couple questions for you, Ms. Elizabeth, and the first one is back in reference actually to one of your earlier slides. It was where you posted the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report where 90% of all accommodation breaches were POS breaches. And do you possibly know what the meaning is behind that? I think you said that they stemmed from POS breaches. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the actual point of sale machines were what was breached in those reports. So okay. They found that 90% of them were the actual machines that were being breached that led to the overall data breach.
Wow, that's astounding. It's astounding.
Isn't it?
It is. It's amazing. And another question is that PCI DSS requirement 12.6 states that personnel should be educated in formal security awareness upon hire and annually. And the question there is, would the QIR certification satisfy that for payment application developers?
That's a great question.
If you're a payment application developer, if you got your QIR certification, would that qualify?
It's possible, and what we typically will refer you to, as I mentioned, is the security awareness information supplement, but whether or not that actually will satisfy that is more of a compliance question and should be directed to your payment card brand. It's a great, I was going to say it is something that I would recommend. However, as far as does it actually meet the intent of that requirement would be something you would need to direct to them to make sure that they would give approval for that.
Right, right. And maybe your qualified security assessor during your assessment could assist you perhaps. But like you said, the acquirer at the end of the day is the one who's going to be approving your assessment. So
exactly. Yeah, your QSA definitely could help you answer that question as well.
Right. And you know, I know that you know, you'd mentioned the QIR and also the PCIP certifications, and it is really great education. I know for me personally speaking, and so on my team, I also have a person that's QIR certified, and that you know does testing and certification of POS systems, and it was really a great eye opener for the folks on my team here to go to that PCI training, because it really gives you a much better knowledge about like some of the basic blocking and tackling that you were talking about earlier. You know, change your default passwords, you know, secure and make sure that you're securing all systems and not allowing remote access unless absolutely necessary. You know, all of those basic blocking and tackling type of items. So
yeah, it's really good information, and what I find is like those are the low-hanging fruit that you find in a lot of small merchant environments. You know, what I like to say is that password's not a password, admin's not a password, you know, your dog's name's not a password. Those are really too simple. And then that remote access, if they have it, if they're aware that they have it, and educating the merchants when the technicians go in, then they know to ask those questions, because they often don't know. But yeah, you're right. It's that super simple, basic kinds of things that can be done. And that particular certification provides that level of detail to those technicians when they become a QIR, so they know, oh, this is the simple stuff. This is the low-hanging fruit that I can educate, you know, my clients about.
yes, exactly. So, well, I think that was all the questions that we had today. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. And please complete the survey when you get the link, and you'll receive another link to the presentation itself. And Elizabeth, thank you very much for sharing your time, your knowledge, and all of this great information. So everybody have a great rest of their day. Thank you.